Reinforcements have arrived. Reinforcements have arrived.
Ready and waiting. Well. Affirmative. Agreed.
Yes, affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Awaiting orders. Well. Agreed.
Engineering, affirmative.
Report affirmative. Acknowledged. At once.
Yes, affirmative.
Reporting. Very well, very well.
Yes. Engineering, affirmative.
Acknowledged. At once.
Yes, affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Very well. Affirmative. At once. Affirmative. At once. Awaiting orders. Agreed. Acknowledged. Agreed. At once. Affirmative.
Yes, affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Agreed. At once.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Engineering. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. At once.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. At once. Agreed. Affirmative. Affirmative. Very well.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Waiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. At once. At once. Very well. Very well.
Yes, sir. Comrade. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Very well. Very well. At once.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Agreed.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Reporting. At once. Very well. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Reporting. Agreed. Very well.
Engineering. Engineering. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Agreed. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Ready. Affirmative.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative.
New construction options.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Training.
Yes, sir. At once. At once.
Engineering. Affirmative. Engineering. Affirmative.
Reporting. Yes, sir. At once.
Yes, affirmative.
Acknowledged. At once. Affirmative.
Yes, affirmative. Engineering. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Yes, sir.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Waiting. Very well.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Yes, affirmative. Affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Ready and waiting. Very well. Very well.
On hold. Cancel.
Yes, sir. Of course. Reporting. At once.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Reporting. At once.
Unit ready.
Very well.
Chronosphere charging. Reinforcements have arrived.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting
Yes,
orders.
sir.
Very well. Affirmative. Agreed.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Affirmative. Reporting. Reporting at once. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Training.
Affirmative.
Yeah, affirmative.
Unit ready. Training.
Affirmative. Moving out. What? Okay.
Credits stored.
What?
Unit ready.
Out. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. At once. Of course.
Credits stolen.
Ready and wait. Yes, sir.
Training.
Acknowledged. Very well.
Unit
What?
ready.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yeah.
Chronosphere ready. Select target. Credits stolen. Chronosphere charging.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Construction options. Building.
Yes, sir. Agreed. Very well. Affirmative.
Unit
sir.
lost. Our base is under
Affirmative.
attack.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Training. Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Training.
Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Waiting orders. Yes, sir. Agreed.
Construction complete. Construction options. Building. Construction complete. Construction options. Training. Unit ready. Training.
Waiting orders. Very well.
Unit ready. Training.
Yes, sir.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building. Chronosphere ready.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Report affirmative. Affirmative.
Training. Unit ready.
Ready and wait.
Training.
Affirmative.
Unit
Reporting
ready.
at once.
Construction complete. New construction options. Building. Building. On hold. Cancel.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
On hold. Cancel.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready. Construction complete.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative.
Building. Building. Unit lost.
Waiting at once. Yes, sir. Very well.
Our base
Reporting.
is under
Yes,
attack.
sir.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Very well. At once. Reporting. Yes, sir. Of course. Acknowledge. At once. Report
Unit
affirmative.
ready. Building. Construction complete. New construction options. Select target. Unit ready. Chronosphere charging.
Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building. Training.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Training.
Report. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Building.
Reporting. Very well. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, affirmative. Waiting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction complete. Building. Construction options. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Building. Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. At once.
Construction complete. Building. Unit ready.
Comrade.
Unit lost. Building.
Yes, sir.
Chronosphere ready. Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Very well. Yes, sir. Report affirmative. Acknowledge affirmative. 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 Acknowledge.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting.
Unit
Yes,
lost.
sir.
Training.
Ready and waiting. Yes,
Unit
affirmative. Very
ready.
well. Awaiting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Ready and waiting. Very well. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Building.
Awaiting orders.
Unit ready. Building. Cancel.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Report
Construction
acknowledged.
complete.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative.
New construction
Yes, sir.
options.
Vehicle acknowledged.
Building. Unit lost. Unit
Of course.
lost.
Yes, sir.
Our
Yes,
base
sir.
is under attack. Building.
Waiting order.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Affirmative.
repaired.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Very well. Affirmative. Of course.
Construction complete. Unable to comply. Building in progress. Unit ready.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Reporting.
Reporting.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Repairing. Construction complete. Unit repaired. Building.
Yes, sir.
Repairing.
Vehicle reporting. Reporting. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit repaired.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Construction
Affirmative.
complete.
Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Building.
Vehicle affirmative. Reporting. Yes, sir. Reporting.
Our base is under attack.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Training. Unit ready.
Ready at once. Yes, sir.
Unit lost. Select target. Unit lost. Chronosphere charging.
Acknowledged.
Training.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. At once. Affirmative.
Training. Unit lost. Unit ready.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Vehicle reporting. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Vehicle acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Vehicle acknowledged. Acknowledged. Report affirmative.
Prepare.
Vehicle report affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit lost.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. At once. Yes, sir.
Report. Affirmative.
Preparing. Training. Unit lost. Unit
Reporting.
ready.
Affirmative.
Building. Training. Unit lost. Unit ready. Unit repaired.
Reporting. At once.
Training.
Waiting
Unit
order.
ready.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Report. Acknowledged.
Repairing. Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Waiting order.
Unit
Waiting
repaired.
order. Acknowledged.
Repairing.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Unit repaired. Unit ready. Building.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Repairing. On hold. Cancelled. Insufficient funds. Unit repaired. Repairing.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit repaired. Repairing. Unit repaired.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Very well.
Building. Unit ready. Training. Unit ready.
Reporting.
Training.
At
Unit
once.
ready.
Ready
Training.
and wait. Affirmative.
Unit
Awaiting
ready.
orders. Very well.
Training. Unit
Awaiting
ready.
orders. Agreed.
Building. Unit ready.
Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building. Building. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Unit
Affirmative.
lost.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Building. Construction options. Unit ready. Building. Training. Unit ready. Training. Unit
Awaiting
ready.
orders. At once.
Building. Insufficient funds.
Comrade, acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Comrade, affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Spy plane ready. On hold.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Select target. Building. Unit ready. Building. On hold.
Yes, sir.
Cancel.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Comrade? Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Building.
Affirmative. Waiting order. Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Spotlight
Affirmative.
ready.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building. On hold.
Affirmative.
Cancel.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Building.
Affirmative.
Unable to comply. Building in progress.
Affirmative.
Insufficient funds.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit
Acknowledge.
lost.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit lost.
Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Unable to comply.
Affirmative.
Building in
Acknowledge.
progress.
Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit
Acknowledge.
lost.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit
Acknowledge.
ready.
Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative.
Unit
well.
lost.
Yes, sir. Very well. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge.
Building.
Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Affirmative. 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 Waiting or acknowledge. Yes, sir. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Awaiting for affirmative.
Reporting. Very well. Affirmative.
Awaiting for affirmative. Affirmative.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Vehicle acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting on acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Comrade. Affirmative.
Training. Primary building selected. Unit ready. Training. Primary building selected.
Yes.
Unit ready.
Affirmative.
Training.
Yes, sir. Very well.
Unit
Very well.
ready. Training.
At once. Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Yes,
Training.
sir. At once.
Unit ready.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. At once. Yes, sir.
Training.
Acknowledged. Agreed.
Unit ready. Training. Cancel.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Agreed.
Training. Unit ready.
Waiting. Affirmative. Yes. Affirmative.
Unit lost.
Waiting. Affirmative. Yes. Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Mission accomplished.